Dave McNicoll, Space Cake Dave. He's the founder and president of the Oregon Responsibles. He is the owner and founder and president of the Oregon Responsible Edible and has been a proud member of the Oregon cannabis community for the past 10 years. With his edible company, Dave's Space Cakes, Dave McNicoll sets himself apart as an industry leader by striving to create best practices for edible product packaging and labeling and consumer safety standards. He has gained incredible experience sitting on the OLCC and OHA Rules Advisory Committees, as well as advising state senators and representatives on edible and industry issues. He continues his work by creating industry-wide best practices with his current seat on the National Cannabis Industry Association-sponsored National Packaging and Labeling Standards Committee. I give you one awesome dude, Dave, Space Cake Dave McNicoll.
Okay, thank you, Mike. That was wonderful. Okay, hi everybody. My name is David McNicoll. I'm the owner of Dave's Space Cakes. I had a PowerPoint to share with you. Oh, I got the clicker. Okay. Okay, that's me. There we go. All right. So yes, thank you to Mike for the invitation. They called me on Friday to come out to give this talk tonight. I'm going to talk about my experiences with best practices as an edible business owner and how I took those experiences and applied them to best practices in politics and the regulatory process for cannabis here in Oregon. Okay, so just a quick update on Dave's Space Cakes. We've been off the market since January 1st. Edible makers have had a tremendous time or tremendous trouble getting back onto market since the October 1st and January 1st changes. I'm incredibly excited. I was able to lease a building last week, a former restaurant. So we're going to be able to get that back, OLCC licensed, and we'll be back up and running as soon as we can. Okay. I just wanted to briefly run through the resume that I've been able to establish here in Oregon. I've had a pretty interesting journey to go from being an edible maker to being involved in the regulatory process and on the political side. Just to briefly go through, I'm going to kind of go into detail on all these things through my presentation. In February of 2015, I became an advisor on cannabis to Senator Ginny Burdick, who was co-chair of the Measure 91 committee. Later that year, we founded the Oregon Retailers of Cannabis Association, which is a group for cannabis dispensaries. And then I was given a seat on the OLCC Rules Advisory Subcommittee for edibles, topicals, and infused products in June of 2015. And later that year, we founded the Oregon Responsible Edibles Council. And I was also given a seat on the Oregon Health Authority Rules Advisory Committee for marijuana as the sole seat for processors. And all that work here in Oregon has led to the NCIA-sponsored National Packaging and Labeling Standards Committee that has the likes of Dixie Elixirs, Kiva Confections, Zoots, some of the largest edible companies in the whole country. And there's some really exciting work that we've been doing with that committee. So I wanted to, how did this happen in 3 years? I wanted to start with showing you the professional experience that I had before I was a business owner 3 years ago. That's it. I had no experience prior to starting my business. I never owned a business. I've never been a professional baker. I never knew a single thing about politics. We had a great talk on good manufacturing procedures and processes. That was a wonderful talk. I'm the guy who's been making edibles in my home kitchen for the past 3 years. And so I'm very excited that we're able to grow with the industry, and the best practices have gotten to the point where they are. Just for a little bit of background on myself, I was a grower for 7 years under the OMP program, and I have a 16-year history with using cannabis for medical purposes. And I've been arrested twice for that while I was living in Kansas. Cannabis has always been a huge part of my life, and I knew that I always had to be a part of legal cannabis once we got the dispensary system here in Oregon. So I thought I'd start with a brief history of best practices in the Oregon cannabis industry. It's a very easy starting point in that we had none. This is a brand new industry that started 3 years ago. And as everybody knows, we kind of started out with the Wild West of cannabis. It was anything goes pretty much. And it was really interesting over the past 3 years to watch the industry learn to regulate itself. And we've had state agencies step up their enforcement of regulatory issues. And so we've really been able to go from the Wild West to a much more regulated system. At one point, about a year after the dispensary program got started, I started to say that we had the law and then we had the law of dispensaries. And those two things were not the same. And you could follow all the rules and try to sell to dispensaries and they wouldn't buy products from you. They kind of had their own set of standards. And of course, for best practices, for me, I feel that one of the biggest parts of best practices is having relationships within your industry. That's how ideas are shared, and these concepts can grow and be fed off of each other to really improve the industry for everybody involved. And so I was able to establish an incredible amount of relationships across the state. Okay. Oh, there we go. Yeah, and it wasn't about how much money you made in cannabis. It was about how you conducted that business and how you established those relationships with people. So after about a year of running my business, I somehow became known as an expert in packaging, labeling, and dosing of edibles. Several of the ways that I did that was I really focused on, I decided early on to be a single product company. I knew how essential consistency would be in the industry going forward. And once we got to the recreational system, if you couldn't accurately produce edibles 100% of the time, I knew you would never be able to get onto market. So I chose to do the single product so I could focus on consistency and making that product the best that I possibly could. For packaging, at the very beginning, for about 3 years now, I've used the same child-resistant package. And that was a really big difficulty for the edible industry when we first started, because there weren't really any child-resistant packages. I chose to use the pop-top bottle that everybody's familiar with. And instead of making a product and then trying to find a package for it, I found the package that I wanted to use, being that pop-top, and I found a product that could fit inside of it. I felt that as edible makers, it was our duty to put our products into child-resistant packages and do what was best for all of us. And I thought that that would look the best from the outside to say that yes, we do have all child-resistant packages. And that was one of those, the law of dispensaries, they basically just ignored the child-resistant packaging standard for years. People were just putting edibles in plastic bags and the little deli containers. And so it was important for me to always have that child-resistant container. For consistency, I personally produced every single one of my products for the first 18 months so that I could ensure that there was accurate dosing for those products. And then for the labeling was a major issue, and I've got some examples up here. The labeling rules and regulations changed so frequently over the years that it was very difficult for edible makers to keep up with their labels, or an edible maker would buy 10,000 labels and then the rules would change, and then they would have to go through those rules before they would update their labels. I decided when I started that I noticed how often the labels would change, and I knew that I always was going to be changing information as far as test results, and I was used strain-specific cannabis, so I always was going to have to change my labels. So I decided to just use the same Avery labels that everybody uses at the dispensaries, and I use the same Avery print and design center that everybody else uses. And so my labels, they weren't fancy, they're not going to win any design awards, but they were always compliant. And as soon as there was a regulation change, I was able to go in and immediately change my label. And I became well known for having a package that was always 100% compliant. And if there were questions at a dispensary, a lot of the times they would say, oh, does your label have the same information as the Dave Space Cake label? And that was really one of the first times that I experienced best practices within the industry. And so the big secret of what I did that seemed to be different than everybody else was I read the rules and then I followed them. And this was really difficult for edible makers. And so that's how I got here, guys. That's the big thing that I did special. I read the rules and I followed them. And so yeah, that was when I really started to get recognition within the industry. And that's really where I discovered that I really have an inner drive for industry best practices. And when I was making decisions for my business, it wasn't about me. It wasn't about what's best for my company. I would always have in the back of my head, what's going to be best for the industry? What is going to make us all look better? And that inner drive of always just striving for the industry, I think has been one of the biggest reasons for my success. So in February of 2015, I became a special advisor on cannabis issues to State Senator Ginny Burdick, who was co-chair of the Joint Committee for the Implementation of Measure 91. Now, I started my business in March of 2014, and in February of 2015, I somehow became a special advisor to one of the two most powerful women in cannabis in the entire state of Oregon. And how the hell did that happen? I'm gonna let you guys know. So this is a story that I have never really told very many people. I'm excited to let you guys know about it today. A couple years ago, I was reading a newspaper article about a case in Bend in which there was a woman had eaten some edibles, and the article was about how she was in a coma because she had fallen asleep on the bathroom floor in her hotel, and they found edibles around her, and she ended up waking up a few hours later and checked out of the hotel and left. But in the article, they were still saying that this woman was in a coma and there was a senator who was mentioned in that article as saying that this is a huge problem. I'm not sure that we can allow edibles in this state. And that was when they were talking about banning edibles for 2 years. And the edibles were, it said that the edibles were bought in Washington. They didn't have a child-resistant package. They didn't have a proper label. They had no dosing information on them. And I was so pissed off when I read this article that I clicked on this senator's name, and it went to her webpage, and it had a little email. And so I clicked on her email, and I just started writing this woman an email. And it was a mean email, and I was being a total dick. And I got halfway through this email, and I realized that, I have some really good points here. And this might actually be something that could be effective. And I slowed down, and I basically erased the whole thing, and I restarted. And I used my nice professional language. And the biggest thing about why that email worked is because of what I was just mentioning about how I became an expert in packaging, labeling, and dosing for edibles. And when I wrote the email to this woman, who I had no idea who she was at the time, I opened the line with, hi, my name is David McNicoll, and I'm an expert in packaging, labeling, and dosing of edible products. And then I went on to tell her my thoughts on that article, and at the end of the email I said, if you want to know about edibles, if you want to know more, then you should give me a call. And I basically challenged her to give me a call so I could inform her about these issues. And I sent the email, and I thought, okay, that's probably the last I'll ever even think about that. And so the next day, I was at a friend's house, and we were smoking a joint. And, I'm pretty sure that we had actually smoked a joint, and we were smoking our second joint. And so I got a telephone call, and I didn't recognize the number, and I thought, oh, hey, maybe somebody wants to buy some space cakes. And so I said hello, and there was this old woman who was asking for my name, and I was like, who in the hell is this old lady who knows my name? And she said something, and then she said, this is the senator. And I was just like, what? And then I literally said, this is the senator calling me? And she said, yes. And she was all business. And she said, I want to meet with you. I want you to come to my office in Salem, and I want to talk to you. And I said, oh, yes, ma'am. Okay. And she said and then she said her people would call me and tell me what time to be there. And I said, yes, ma'am. And then she hung up the phone. And then I was freaking out. I didn't know what to do. So I called my lobbyist friend, and he helped me prepare. And we went to that meeting. And we went up to her office. We said hello. We didn't even get through the pleasantries or the introductions. And this woman, she marched right up to me. And I could see the absolute terror in her eyes as she looked right at me, and she said, how many edibles would it take for a person to consume a lethal dose? And I was there to talk about packaging and labeling and how to properly dose edibles, and I was just like, holy shit, we are starting from the basics here, from the beginning. And I looked at the senator, and I said with the most conviction I could put into my voice, I said, Senator, it is not possible for a person to die from consuming edibles. And she just kind of looked at me, and she said, oh, okay. And all that fear just drained out of her face. And we ended up talking for about an hour and a half during that conversation about all cannabis-related issues. And we got out of that meeting, and my lobbyist friend just looked at me like, I don't know what the hell just happened in there, but those meetings are at a maximum 15 minutes long. They usually kick you out after 10 minutes. And to have been in there for an hour and a half on the very first day of session was an incredible accomplishment. So Senator Burdick and I have had a great working relationship ever since then. And so it's been very helpful for edibles and for the industry as a whole. And oh, I got my cool slide here. Yeah. Oh, wrong way. There we go. So after that meeting, I discovered that I had an absolute passion for lobbying on cannabis issues. And I realized that this was going to be my way of setting myself apart from my competition. Dave Space Cakes, you're looking at the whole company right now. And I knew that I was never going to be able to compete with some of these much larger capitalized companies that were going to be coming in. So I knew that I had to find a way to set myself apart. And I was able to utilize the concept of best practices to really build into a political career. And so my political partner, Casey Houlihan, we formed the Oregon Retailers of Cannabis Association that year. It's a group of dispensaries and retailers. And we also did processors as well when we started. But we pretty much lobbied on behalf of the entire industry through ORCA. That was great for me because I was able to decide all of the input on edible issues. So that was my first experience in a leadership role on the political side. And that's really where I learned how to be a proper lobbyist. As I really had no knowledge about politics before I went to that meeting with Senator Burdick. I didn't know what legislation was. I didn't know what regulation was. I didn't know how laws worked or what bills were. And I went on an extremely intense crash course on lobbying that initial year. And so that is really what led directly into the beginning of my political career. That summer, I was chosen for the OLCC Rules Advisory Committee for Edibles, Topicals, and Infused Products. That was a wonderful experience. I was able to establish relationships, relationships. I was able to establish those with OLCC executives, all of whom are still working there. If anybody has done the labeling process, Jamie Dickinson, she actually ran the RAC meetings, and then Amanda Borup, the current policy analyst, was also a part of those. After that led directly into the OHA Rules Advisory Committee. And if you could see my notes, you would see where I write no relationships, and then I have a sad smiley face, because they're not very friendly at the OHA. I was incredibly lucky to be a part of both agencies' rulemaking process. And for me, the goal is always about best practices for the entire industry. I wasn't there just to recommend recommendations that were going to be best for me or were going to be easier for edibles or for my personal business. I was always there for the best practices of the industry. And that just means that I was really well suited for that type of work. Okay. At this point, I was able to, I resigned my seat as a board member of ORCA so that I could start the Oregon Responsible Edibles Council. I needed to branch out on my own. I learned that the really good lobbyists, they represent a group, and ORCA was becoming more and more the dispensary group, and so I didn't really fit in there anymore. And I really wanted to do something to unite the edible makers as well. I'd gone to, I don't know, hundreds of these association meetings, and I could count on, one hand the number of times that we'd actually talked about edible issues. Growers, dispensaries, extracts just were always more important to talk about than edibles. I'm just going to put this up here. We've got a meeting this Thursday up in Portland, so I just want to leave that info up there while I'm talking. So with OREC, one of the big things that I wanted to do was provide public education on edible issues. 3 years ago, edibles were given a terrible name, and they had a very bad reputation. People were afraid of edibles. People thought they were dangerous. There was a lot of negative press about edibles, about overconsumption issues. So I wanted to have a voice out there that had something positive to say about edibles. I wanted to do something about the problem instead of just talk about it or bitch about it. And then the other thing that we were trying to do was we wanted to create a strong Oregon craft industry that would be able to utilize, to fulfill the market and fill some of those gaps, so when the larger companies tried to come in, we wouldn't have room for them. That didn't work so well. But at our peak, we grew to about 33 members. The October 1st and the January 1st changes for processors have devastated our membership base. So we're at a rebuilding phase right now. The biggest thing that we were able to accomplish with OREC has been the Try-5 campaign. This is a campaign that I've been working on since early 2015. It's based off of a similar campaign in Colorado called the First Time 5. And we just want to start the conversation for people who have never consumed edibles, don't know what edibles are, don't really understand what the THC or what the milligrams are in their edibles. And so we worked really hard. We've got the graphic designer who helped with the Try-5 campaign, Rachel Matagora, sitting right over there. Big applause to her, please. Yeah. She's being too modest. And so we've had tremendous success with the Try-5 campaign. The idea was to take the campaign image, and we made posters, and then we sold sponsorships to other edible makers and other cannabis companies so they could get their logos on the bottom. And then we went ahead and delivered those posters to as many of the dispensaries that we possibly could. We launched the campaign in May of 2016, right before the June 2nd release of recreational edibles. And the feedback has been tremendous. Very rarely do we have a place say they don't want to put it up. And we think that it's really had a strong effect on the consumers. And I'm very excited for the future of the campaign. We're working very hard to get the campaign, not just here in Oregon. We have partnerships in New Mexico, Colorado, Alaska, Massachusetts. This past weekend I talked to somebody in California. People who see the campaign, they really gravitate towards it. It really resonates with consumers, and we really believe that the Try-5 campaign is going to have a really big effect on edible consumption across the whole country as laws are relaxed. We're very excited to be a part of that. So we've been able to do a lot with OREC as far as the lobbying side as well. The biggest thing that we did was we got the expansion of early retail sales to include edibles, topicals, and extracts. Again, sorry, concentrates. We assumed that concentrates would be included in there, somehow they got left out of the mix. Last year we had a big hand in getting the ODA to regulate industrial hemp CBD consumables. They just put those rules out on March 15th. Yes, and then earlier this year for control study testing, we asked the OLCC and the OHA to include multiple flavors of the same type of edible product, and they went ahead and did that. That was cool. So I'm got to wrap up here, so we're going to skip that one. And so all of the work that I've done here in Oregon has really led to what I'm going to be trying to do on a national stage. The National Packaging and Labeling Standards Committee, we are charged with putting together a white paper on packaging and labeling standards, which we've been working on since I think last March. Actually, it's been an entire year that we've been doing this. Yeah, and I just actually received a final copy of that today, so that's actually going to be coming out in the next week or two. It's about a 100-page document. It's basically the Bible on packaging and labeling standards. It's got regulatory language that states can use, and it's going to have a huge effect on packaging and the labeling of cannabis products over the next several years. So I'm definitely very excited to be a part of that. And as for me, as soon as this run with this committee is over, I am done with my committees for now. The biggest thing for me is where will my next seat be? I have no idea, and that's really exciting. So I think that's about it. If there's any questions, I could probably do that.
I just want to say, for those of you who are still learning, we all have a lot of learning to do. greenflowermedia.com, and they have a lot of free stuff, and then you can join $15 a year, a month, I mean, and then you can visit their entrepreneur conference, their online health summit, the 2-day health summit, and they're having another cannabis health summit soon. But this is where I learned that if you drink 45 minutes before taking your medibles, you drink mango juice, a glass of mango juice, and they also really talk up chocolate. And one thing I want to talk up is having the Temple Beverage of India bong parties, and then people in the space taxi could deliver people to the party and take them home. So look up the Temple Beverage of India, B-H-A-N-G, bong.
Okay.
Other questions for Dave in the audience?
Questions, going once, going twice.
All right, we are running a little bit over tonight. Big round of applause for Dave McNicoll.
Thank you.
As some of you may have noticed, Mike Drudzy and I actually had to arm wrestle to see who would get to actually introduce Dave tonight. And if you saw those muscles, you'll see why he won. I've known Dave for a few years, and it's just incredible to have him take the stage. He will be here for a little bit longer if you guys have questions about additional resources.